better known as the Bears. We welcome him back to Tuscaloosa. Chris Fallica, I hope you're having a great day. Welcome into the game in T-Town.
Good afternoon. Yeah, we're hitting the road for a little abbreviated holiday, and then we head on down to the Plains on Friday morning. So yeah, looking forward to a great weekend ahead. That's for sure. Not only in Auburn, but a bunch of big games throughout the landscape on Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, I want to spend time sort of picking your brain, the way that you understand college football, a lot from your eyes, but also the analytics that you put into it. When you saw the rankings released last night, what grabbed your attention? Maybe something that you agreed with, or maybe you didn't agree with when you see the college football playoff rankings released.
I think the two things that jumped out to me were Miami's moving to number 2 in the standings, which is kind of a big deal because if they are to stay at 2, in theory, that could potentially mean it's easier to stay within the top 4 if you say you lose in the ACC title game, which is essentially a road game for them in Charlotte against Clemson. But at the same time, the fact that South Carolina sneaked into the back end of the rankings as well, that gives Clemson an opportunity to beat another ranked team this week. So it'll be interesting to see how the committee views those particular teams next week, where Miami's 2-headed into the ACC championship game. I do think that creates a situation where the potential would be from a debate between maybe a 2-loss Big Ten Ohio State champion and a 1-loss ACC runner-up Miami for that number 4 spot. So that was the biggest thing I took away from last night.
Chris, is it fair to say that the work, and I know everything could work itself out in the next couple of weeks with this final weekend and then the championship weekend, but it looks like this selection committee may have a difficult time, a little bit more of an argument discussion base than they've had in some of the previous years. Do you see that as well?
Yeah, I do. And one thing we're going to talk about on Saturday is the favored scenario. The favored scenario is the scenario I just brought up. Ohio State will be favored in the next 2 games to win the Big Ten title. They'll be favored over Wisconsin probably by around a touchdown. Oklahoma is favored, obviously, to beat West Virginia without Will Grier, and then most likely TCU in the Big 12 championship game. Alabama's favored to win. The SEC favored this weekend at Auburn. They'll be favored in Georgia against the Bulldogs. And then Clemson will be favored, obviously, to beat South Carolina and Miami. That 8-game favorite parlay is really only a 7% chance of that happening. So while it's the favored scenario, it may not necessarily be as easy as those 8 favorites winning. But I'm curious to see if that does play out that way, what the committee has to do. Because are you going to use a resume-type foundation where, okay, you have a conference champion that has 2 losses, but you lost by 31 at Iowa and you lost by 2 touchdowns on your home field to Oklahoma, or are you going to use a little bit more of a judgment? Well, Miami got through the regular season undefeated, played out number 2 or number 2-3 team in the country in the ACC title game, lost, but didn't win the title, but we're going to reward them for what they did to get here. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing that the committee could be up against. There are a lot of other scenarios, too. And I know one of the things is, and we're going to talk about, is just the 2-loss pecking order. Would Ohio State's resume necessarily be better than, say, Notre Dame with 2 losses, or Clemson with 2 losses, or USC with 2 losses? A bunch of 2-loss teams potentially could have a better resume than Ohio State.
Chris, before we get to this Alabama and Auburn matchup, I'd just like to hear you, from your perspective, evaluate this Alabama football team. What do you see in the Crimson Tide?
I see a team that has looked, definitely as Mississippi State, they look vulnerable in that game, as vulnerable as they've looked in a long time. That's the treetop. But then again, I think in a sense, we're almost nitpicking a little bit. We've come to expect everything to be so dominant and so easy for Alabama just because of the success that they've had lately, that I think any time they get threatened and they look like they could be on the cusp of getting upset, maybe we kind of overreact a little bit. So that's kind of the angle I'm taking. Look, I know Jalen Hurts has his detractors in terms of his ability to throw the football and what he can do, but that kid is a winner. And when they needed him to make plays against Mississippi State, he did, and I think he's a huge difference in the game coming up on Saturday. This is a team that I think the way they're built, they're so tough, They just find ways to win, and that'll be they'll be tested though on Saturday, I believe, that's for sure.
Chris, when you look at the Alabama and Auburn matchup, what jumps out to you first?
I think the biggest thing will be which Auburn offensive line, which Auburn team will show up. Is it the one that got completely whipped up front early in the season against a really good Clemson defense? Alabama has a very similar defensive front and number one nationally in a whole bunch of defensive metrics. Or will it be the one that played a near-perfect game against Georgia, didn't turn it over, committed 5 penalties for 29 yards, none of them of the major variety? Where are they? I think they're a little bit in the middle. Is Auburn's wide receivers, are they able to get some separation to try and create some openings in the passing game? Because I don't think Auburn's going to be able to just hand the ball off to Kerryon Johnson a bunch and expect that to be good enough to beat Alabama Saturday.
Yeah, when you look at the running style, and obviously he's had a ton of carries. Where on the flip side of this, in Tuscaloosa, Jalen Hurts is the leading carrier at 119 and 104 and 102 when you talk about respected backs here in Tuscaloosa. It seems like that Alabama's backs are fresh going into the final week of November.
Yes, and that's something that's been a rarity for Alabama. They've had a tendency to have their guys pick up a lot of carries, and you hit on Jalen carrying the ball a lot as well. Remember last year, everyone was talking about it, fumbling, turning the ball over. Well, he hasn't turned the ball over much at all this year, so he has clearly improved. But will Auburn on the other side, will they be more apt to maybe try and run Jared Stidham a little bit more, maybe try and run some wide receivers or some reverses or some things maybe they haven't shown? Because I do think that ultimately will, in a physical type game, if Kerryon Johnson's getting up to carry 25, 28, 30, I would expect him to probably to maybe start to wear down just a little bit and not be as effective as he's been for the majority of the season.
How remarkable is it from the data, the metrics that are stacking up? And I don't know your metrics, but I've just looked at some of the other ones. Alabama enters Saturday's game as the only team in the country ranked in the top 15 in all the different scoring things on both sides of the football, but really focus on that defense. They've lost so much, and they're ranked in the top 10 in every significant defensive category. How remarkable is that they've lost so much, but they're still able to maintain those numbers that they stack up with the best, if not the best?
I think it's a credit to Nick Saban, or whether it's been Kirby Smart or now Jeremy Pruitt, all of those guys. And I think the way they practice, the way they prepare, the leaders within the team, whether it's been Rashad Evans, whether it's been Sean Dan Hamilton, or going back Reuben Foster in the past, the way they have just groomed players and the freshmen that come in, they know their role, they practice hard, they learn, they're not jealous of playing time, and I think they truly take that first year to really study, prepare, be ready to play in case of, obviously, you take a look at this year with all the injuries they've had, the newcomers that have had to come in and been forced to play, have had an impact because I think of kind of the internal coaching that's on the field with a lot of those players and the ability to really pick up what's going on.
Chris, if we kind of ask you for a lean, I don't want to discount as far as a prediction. I'm sure you'll probably do that on ESPN College GameDay. But which way are you leaning on a Wednesday afternoon in this Iron Bowl?
I've already made my pick on the podcast, and I think Alabama will win by about 10 points. I think this is the type of game, if you're looking at it from a Vegas standpoint, I think it's either you pick Alabama to cover the 4.5, or you pick Auburn to win the game outright. I don't think this is like a 2 or 3 point Alabama win. And one of the things with this game, I think we've heard it since the Mississippi State game. The Auburn bandwagon is really filling up, and Alabama normally doesn't get beat when there's a lot of build-up to a game. Alabama gets beat when they're kind of a big favorite, expected to win, and the underdog kind of makes some plays, and they pull it up. So obviously the championship game last year was an exception, but I think that was a little bit of a different circumstance because of Deshaun Watson and what had happened in the previous year in the title game. But I think the fact that Alabama's not going to be caught napping on Auburn, I think the stakes, I think Nick Saban being able to motivate this team with a lot of I was talking about the questions and the doubt and people sensing that Alabama might be vulnerable. I think that will help feed them. And I just love Jalen Hurts in a game like this, his ability to make plays with his arms and his legs, especially going against another, talk about Alabama's defense. I mean, Auburn's defense is top 6, top 8, and a lot of those points per play, yards per play, type metrics as well. So I don't look for a ton of points on Saturday, but I think it's like a 27-17 type game with Alabama winning.
27-17. Chris, you're making everybody's Thanksgiving that much better. I mean, there's people, that sound that you heard was people yelling in Tuscaloosa, as you said, that Alabama with a 10-point victory there. So let me back up just a little bit. As you look into college football playoffs, I know we're a couple of weeks away, but how do you see the Final Four shaking out?
I have a feeling we're going to see potentially an upset or two down the road. I think Alabama will win the SEC, but I'm not sold that Oklahoma is going to have an easy time with TCU in the Big 12 title game in a rematch. That game was in Norman a couple of weeks ago when Oklahoma played very well in the second half. But I think TCU had some things on offense that Kenny Hill wasn't 100%, and Gary Patterson's defense is still very, very good. And I think in a one-game scenario, they could potentially give Oklahoma some problems. And I'm not sold that it's a slam dunk that Clemson's going to beat Miami and Charlotte. Miami is a team that early in the year, they had a lot going on off the field with the hurricane. They had games canceled, rescheduled. They had to relocate to Orlando for a while. It made a lot of sense that they struggled for the first part of the year in putting teams away and starting slow. And the Virginia game last week was completely predictable with the two big wins they had the previous couple of weeks against Notre Dame and Virginia Tech. This is a team that's built up a lot of confidence. It wouldn't surprise me at all. The belief that they have if they were to beat Clemson potentially in the ACC title game. So I think Ohio State will win the Big Ten, and that will be a dynamic that we need to see. But I do think we're headed towards a situation where we're maybe comparing Clemson or USC or the SEC title game loser with potentially Ohio State for that number 4 spot.
Well, just remind us, if Alabama happens to stumble down in Auburn, you say they won't, just remind you that we've had injuries too here in Tuscaloosa, because I don't hear a lot of people talking about that.
Really? See, you must have missed our show last week. We put up a nice big graphic about all the injuries that Alabama's had. And,
I saw that, yeah. I saw that, but no, they give Clemson this quarterback Syracuse mulligan, and I'm going, man, I think they've had like 6 or 7 linebackers here in Tuscaloosa. I lose count.
Well, the interesting thing with that is that's something that the committee was kind of giving Clemson kind of the benefit of the doubt, like a half loss. At some point, that has to turn into a bad loss for Clemson. I mean, that's a 4-7 Syracuse team. That's not a Syracuse team that's coming off that win and a near upset of Miami. I mean, they've been blown out lately. So that the style of that loss doesn't necessarily bode well for Clemson's resume in terms of that game. You hit on Alabama. It's something we're going to bring up on Saturday as well, and I'm curious to get, and I'm sure a lot of your callers and fans down there have a take as well. Would a one-loss Alabama losing this week have a better chance of remaining in the playoff, or a one-loss Alabama, which was to lose in the SEC championship game, having the good win on the road at Auburn? So I think there are a lot of different opinions on that. I'm curious to see and hear what a lot of people think on that.
Well, in my opinion, they win Saturday, they're in. Just my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think
I tend to agree with that opinion.
Yeah, I think if they win Saturday, they're in. But I don't see Georgia as a potential hurdle. I think they stack up against Alabama when we talk about one-dimensional. But I do. The game got me a little bit nervous down in Lee County from an Alabama perspective here in Tuscaloosa. That job security is based on Saban's success here, and so we have a little favoritism with the Crimson Tide. Hey, Chris, I appreciate you. Happy Thanksgiving, and thanks for lifting our spirits in Tuscaloosa. We greatly appreciate the conversation, and safe travels down to Lee County. I'll see you in the press box. Thank you, sir.
Take care now.